The story opens with the hum of a busy city street, people bustling about in a normal, hurried pace. The sound of car engines and chatter fills the air as pedestrians move along the sidewalk. David Wilson, a decorated black veteran, walks through the crowd with a sense of quiet dignity. His military jacket, adorned with patches of honor and pride, catches the eyes of some passers-by. He's just attended a local community event, his chest swelled with pride from his service to the country. His demeanor is calm and confident as he strolls home, knowing that despite the turbulent events in his past, he's done his part to serve. Just as he crosses an intersection, Officer Brad Walker spots David. Walker, a police officer with a notorious reputation for aggression and racial prejudice, eyes David with suspicion. David's military attire seems to trigger something inside Walker, as he immediately assumes the worst. Without any reason other than his own bias, he makes a snap decision. Walker's gaze lingers on David for a moment before he begins walking toward him. He is known for treating people of color with hostility, particularly when they stand out in any way, and today would be no different. David notices the officer approaching, but doesn't alter his pace or posture. His mind is calm, his hands relaxed at his sides, prepared to handle whatever situation might arise. But Walker's approach is anything but casual. His steps are aggressive, his expression stern, clearly determined to assert his authority. As he nears David, he calls out, his voice cutting through the street's noise. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? You look suspicious in that jacket. Are you even in the military? Take it off, or I'll have to check you out." David, taken aback by the blatant hostility, stops, but doesn't respond immediately. He's used to dealing with challenges, but it's clear to him that this officer's assumptions are based solely on the color of his skin and the uniform he wears. David takes a deep breath, measuring the officer with his gaze. His calm, composed demeanor contrasts sharply with the officer's aggressiveness. Before he can respond, Walker takes another step closer, his tone demanding and accusatory. "I said, take it off, now." The tension in the air is palpable, and a few bystanders begin to watch, sensing the brewing confrontation. David remains silent, standing tall and unafraid as he faces the officer, his pride in his service shining through in the way he stands his ground. Brad Walker steps closer to David, his tone growing more hostile with every word. "Where's your ID? I need to see your identification," he demands, his voice sharp and full of authority. David, still calm, doesn't flinch or react defensively. He reaches into his jacket, slowly pulling out his wallet. "I told you, I'm a veteran," David says firmly, trying to maintain the respect that the uniform commands, despite the officer's challenge. But Brad's eyes narrow, not even giving David a chance to explain further. "You expect me to believe that?" Brad sneers, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Guys like you don't make it that far. You're just pretending to be something you're not." The words sting, but David remains unfazed. His posture doesn't shift, nor does his demeanor. He has endured worse than this: racism, prejudice, and the judgment of others throughout his life. "I'm telling you the truth." "I served in the armed forces," David repeats calmly, hoping the officer would stop questioning his integrity. But Brad isn't interested in hearing the truth. He's already made up his mind. "I don't buy it," Brad retorts, his voice now louder as he tries to intimidate David into submitting. "If you were really who you say you are, you wouldn't be here acting like this." At this point, more pedestrians have noticed the confrontation, and a small crowd starts to gather around them. Phones come out. capturing the tension unfolding on the busy street. Some people watch quietly, uncertain of what to do, while others begin whispering among themselves. The scene grows more charged, with people witnessing the unfair treatment of David. David, realizing that this could escalate into something worse, tries to remain calm and de-escalate the situation. "I'm not disrespecting you," he explains, his voice steady. "I'm trying to tell you that I served my country with honor. I'm not looking for trouble. Please, let's not make this worse." But Brad is not interested in listening. He steps even closer, towering over David, his chest puffed up with a false sense of superiority. "You're being disrespectful to law enforcement," Brad growls, cutting David off before he can say anything else. "You should be grateful I'm even letting you talk. Guys like you are the problem with this country." The crowd begins to murmur louder, some of the onlookers clearly recognizing the unfair treatment, while others remain hesitant, unsure of how to intervene. David's patience is wearing thin, but he doesn't want to escalate things further. He clenches his fists at his sides, fighting the urge to respond in kind. He's a trained professional, someone who has been through difficult situations before, and he knows how to remain composed. But inside, his heart races as he realizes how quickly things could spiral out of control. The pressure builds as Brad continues to berate him, not realizing just how deeply his actions are rooted in prejudice. As Brad's frustration mounts, his grip tightens. His face reddens with anger, and his voice rises to a yell. "You're resisting arrest," he shouts, though David hasn't moved an inch or made any attempt to fight back. Without warning, Brad shoves David hard, causing him to stumble backward. David's feet hit the uneven pavement as Brad uses his weight to force him to the ground. The impact knocks the wind out of David, but he doesn't resist. His body crashes onto the concrete with a sickening thud, his military jacket getting caught underneath him, adding to the roughness of the fall. David's hands are yanked behind his back as Brad forces handcuffs onto his wrists, too tight for comfort. The cold metal digs into his skin, but still, David doesn't protest. His body is tense, but his face remains calm and composed. He's been in dangerous situations before, facing violence from both enemies and prejudice in the country he served. This moment is nothing compared to the harrowing experiences he's had, and he knows better than to fight back against a man who's already allowed his anger to cloud his judgment. Brad grunts with frustration, shouting, "Stop resisting! You're making this worse for yourself." His voice is filled with contempt, but David's response is quiet, measured, and dignified. "I'm not resisting, officer," David says calmly, his voice unwavering. "What you're doing is not necessary. I've done nothing wrong." David's words fall on deaf ears as Brad pulls him roughly to his feet, twisting his arms painfully behind his back as he marches him toward the police car. The crowd, once silent, is beginning to stir. People start to murmur, some out of shock and others out of growing anger at what they're witnessing. A few brave bystanders begin stepping forward, voicing their disapproval. "Let him go! He's a veteran!" one woman shouts from the crowd. Her voice shakes with anger, but her words are clear, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You have no right to treat him like this." "Yeah, show some respect," another man yells. "He's been through enough, and you're treating him like trash." The crowd begins to grow more vocal, and more people pull out their phones, recording every moment of the altercation. Brad glares at the onlookers, his anger growing at the realization that he is being watched. "Back off," he snaps, his voice threatening. But the crowd doesn't back down. If anything, they grow bolder. "You should be ashamed of yourself," someone yells from the back. David remains calm throughout, not looking at the crowd, but instead keeping his attention focused on the officer. His dignity in the face of such a blatant abuse of power speaks volumes, and it's clear to everyone around him that he's handling this with the quiet strength of someone who has seen and endured much worse. "Why don't you take a moment to think about what you're doing here, officer?" David says, his voice even. "This isn't about me. This is about you. You're using your power against someone who's just trying to walk home. I haven't done anything to deserve this." His words are calm but firm, carrying the weight of his years of service and experience. "I served my country, and I don't need to be treated like this by anyone, especially not by someone sworn to protect and serve." Brad doesn't respond immediately, but his grip on David tightens, frustration evident on his face. The handcuffs dig deeper into David's wrists as Brad practically shoves him into the back of the squad car. The crowd continues to shout, some now screaming for justice, others calling for an investigation into Brad's behavior. The scene is chaotic, and the police officer is clearly rattled by the public backlash. David, however, remains unfazed, his back straight, his eyes forward. He doesn't let the officer's hostility or the growing crowd affect his composure. He knows this moment will pass. He's seen violence and prejudice before, and he understands that not everyone can be reasoned with in the heat of the moment. But his silence and calm in this situation are his form of protest, a quiet but powerful statement against the injustice that is unfolding. As the officer slams the car door shut and drives away, the crowd stands, still murmuring their disapproval. The video of the incident is already being shared, and the once unchallenged authority of Officer Brad Walker is starting to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. The people who witnessed this assault know one thing for certain: they have seen a good man wronged, and they are determined to make sure the world knows what happened. The scene shifts dramatically as the elderly woman, standing near the front of the crowd, steps forward with a trembling hand pointing at David. Her voice rings clear above the murmurs of the crowd. "That's Colonel David Wilson. He saved lives overseas." The words hang in the air, causing a brief pause in the tension, as every person in the crowd processes the weight of what they've just heard. David's calm demeanor doesn't change, but the recognition is like a wave crashing into the scene. The officer, Brad, visibly freezes, his grip on David loosening slightly as he looks back and forth between the woman and David. His confidence falters. The crowd begins to stir with whispers, and several people glance back at the elderly woman in disbelief, checking the video they had been recording on their phones to see if they caught the name correctly. Brad's heart races, and he instinctively begins to try and justify his actions. I didn't know. This is a mistake," he stammers, his voice shaky now, filled with panic. He looks around for some semblance of authority, but the growing number of witnesses, with cameras on their phones, makes his escape difficult. Before he can continue, reporters from a nearby event, who had been alerted by the crowd, rush to the scene with cameras in tow. Their questions come rapid fire as they attempt to confirm the identity of the man in handcuffs. One reporter addresses David directly. "Colonel Wilson, is it true that you served overseas in the military?" David nods calmly, his face unwavering despite the chaos. "Yes, that's correct," he says, the deep respect he commands from his military service evident in his tone. "I served in combat zones and returned home to contribute to my community. But that doesn't mean I'm above being treated fairly or with respect." The reporters quickly verify David's identity, digging through their phones for information. A few moments later, one of them holds up a photo on their screen, a snapshot of David in uniform, standing tall and proud next to his fellow soldiers, a Medal of Honor hanging from his neck. The crowd gasps as they see the military insignia displayed prominently on his chest, confirming what the elderly woman had said. The video of the incident, showing Brad aggressively cuffing David with no provocation, is now spreading rapidly across social media. People comment on it from all over, expressing outrage over the way a decorated war hero was treated by a law enforcement officer who was supposed to uphold justice, not abuse it. The media coverage begins to snowball, with the story breaking through the local news and making its way to national headlines. Brad's previously confident posture begins to crumble. He steps back, his face pale, trying to process the shift in circumstances. The crowd, now emboldened by the revelation, becomes more vocal. "You should be ashamed of yourself," one person shouts from the back. "This man is a hero. He's done more for this country than you ever will." The anger in the crowd rises as their disdain for Brad's actions intensifies. "Please, listen," Brad says, his voice cracking. I thought he was a troublemaker. I didn't know. I'm just doing my job." His words lack conviction now, falling flat as people start shaking their heads in disbelief. David, now standing tall, maintains his poise, looking directly at Brad with quiet strength. "You see, officer, this isn't about me. It's about how you treated me, without knowing a thing about me. You assumed based on my appearance, based on who you thought I was. This is about respect. You didn't show me respect, and now you're trying to cover it up." Brad, sweating and visibly uncomfortable, stumbles over his words. "I wasn't thinking straight. I was just trying to do my job." David shakes his head. "You're not thinking straight now either, officer. I didn't resist. I didn't fight back. But you didn't give me the dignity I deserve. And now you'll have to face the consequences of your actions." The reporters capture every word on camera, and the bystanders who have been recording the scene share the videos in real time, spreading the story even further. David's voice rings clear over the noise. "This isn't about me being above the law. It's about equality. Everyone deserves it, no matter who they are." As Brad stares at the growing crowd, realizing the magnitude of his mistake, the truth begins to settle in. His actions, caught on film, have now sparked an undeniable public outcry. The weight of the situation is no longer something he can brush aside. This is a turning point, not just for him, but for every person who's watched this injustice unfold. The crowd continues to express their disgust at Brad's actions, some even calling for his dismissal. The authorities arrive soon after, and with the media swarming around, it's clear that Brad's future as a law enforcement officer is uncertain at best. But for David, the events of the day serve as another reminder of the ongoing fight for justice, dignity, and respect for all. As the commotion intensifies, the local police chief arrives at the scene, flanked by a group of officers. He assesses the situation quickly, noting the growing crowd and the evidence of Brad's actions, captured in video by witnesses. The chief, clearly shocked and embarrassed by the events that have unfolded, approaches David, who stands resolutely, still in handcuffs, but composed. The chief's face reddens with discomfort as he extends his hand to David. "I am so sorry for what's happened here, sir," the police chief says, his voice thick with regret. "This is unacceptable. Brad, release him now." The chief's order is firm, and within moments Brad, who is still visibly shaken, fumbles with the handcuffs and unlocks them, allowing David to stand free. Brad's eyes dart nervously, but he says nothing, his guilt hanging in the air. David calmly adjusts his jacket as the chief turns to him once more, his expression earnest. "You have my deepest apologies," he says. "I will ensure that this is addressed immediately, and we will look into Brad's conduct thoroughly." David simply nods, his eyes never leaving Brad, who stands several feet away, unable to meet his gaze. The crowd's anger simmers, but David holds up his hand, signaling for quiet. He addresses the growing number of onlookers, his voice carrying the weight of experience and conviction. "This isn't just about what happened to me today," David begins, his tone calm but powerful. "This is about accountability. This is about every single person who has ever been mistreated, misunderstood, or prejudged because of the way they look or who they are. I'm not pressing charges, because this isn't just about me. It's about changing the system." The crowd falls silent as David's words resonate. His decision to rise above the situation, rather than retaliate or escalate, sends a powerful message. The bystanders, many of whom had been recording the incident, start murmuring their agreement, some raising their fists in solidarity. David's grace under pressure leaves a lasting impression on those who witnessed the event firsthand. As news of the incident spreads, the story goes viral. Local and national news outlets pick up the story, and the hashtag number Justice for David trends on social media. The footage of Brad's unwarranted assault on David becomes a rallying cry for communities demanding an end to systemic racism within law enforcement. Citizens gather in front of the precinct, holding signs and chanting for accountability. The city's residents demand Brad's suspension and a thorough investigation into his actions. Calls for reform and changes to police practices grow louder as protests against police brutality intensify. While the protests gain momentum, David remains a calm and measured voice in the chaos. He does not seek vengeance, nor does he allow the anger of the moment to cloud his larger goal. His refusal to press charges further fuels the message he wishes to send. The fight for justice is not about personal retribution, but about ensuring that such injustices are never repeated. In an interview with the press, David reiterates his stance. "We all have the right to be treated with dignity, regardless of our race, background, or uniform. This is not a moment for hate, but for change." His words resonate deeply with the public, many of whom had been moved by the way he handled the situation. Behind the scenes, the police chief orders an internal investigation into Brad's conduct. Within days, the department begins a full review of his history, and his actions on the day of the incident are added to a growing list of complaints filed against him by others within the community. It becomes clear that this is not an isolated incident, but part of a larger problem of systemic bias and misconduct within the force. Brad is placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. His future in the police force remains uncertain, and the department is forced to reckon with the fallout of his actions. Meanwhile, David's call for systemic reform gains traction, and the local government announces plans to review its police practices, including the implementation of anti-bias training and better oversight mechanisms. The public outcry, paired with David's dignity and clarity of purpose, forces a long-overdue conversation about racism within law enforcement. While the battle is far from over, the spark for change has been lit, and David Wilson's stand becomes a symbol of hope for many who have long felt voiceless in the face of prejudice and abuse of power. As David walks away from the scene, flanked by supportive members of the community, He knows that this moment will not be the last in his fight for justice. But he also knows that real change comes from a commitment to truth, respect, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves equal treatment under the law. Brad's suspension is the first step in a long process of accountability. After the internal investigation, it's revealed that his history of misconduct goes beyond the incident with David. The department places him on indefinite leave, pending a full review of his actions, while Brad faces disciplinary hearings that could determine his future in law enforcement. Though the community waits for the final decision, the damage to his career is irreversible. The public's reaction is harsh, and Brad's actions are deemed a violation of the very oath he took to protect and serve. David, meanwhile, uses the spotlight to advocate for real change. Rather than focusing on his personal experience, he makes it clear that this incident is part of a larger, systemic problem. David becomes a vocal proponent for racial sensitivity training within the police department. He collaborates with local leaders and activists, pushing for policy changes that promote fairness and accountability. He speaks at town halls, organizes community forums, and meets with local officials, urging them to take concrete actions to combat racial bias in law enforcement. His message is simple but powerful. Respect is not optional. It's essential for justice. David's journey to bring about lasting change becomes a collective effort. The city sees the formation of a task force dedicated to bridging the gap between the police and the community. They develop educational programs, hold training seminars, and work together to rebuild the trust that was broken. People of all backgrounds, including officers who want to learn and grow, come together to participate in these initiatives. The effort is slow but steady, and there is a sense of hope that real transformation is underway. The story culminates in a citywide event in honor of David's service. A ceremony is held not just to celebrate his bravery, but to emphasize the importance of unity, justice, and equality. People from all walks of life, including families, activists, police officers, and community leaders, gather to show their support. David is recognized not only for his military service, but also for his role in driving change in the community. As he stands before the crowd, David speaks with humility and conviction, reinforcing his belief that real progress comes from listening to one another and standing together. The story ends on a hopeful note, with the city united in its pursuit of a more just and equal future. David's message resonates in the hearts of everyone present. Change is possible, but it requires collective action, empathy, and unwavering commitment to fairness. As the event wraps up, people linger to talk, share their stories, and make plans for future collaboration, knowing that while the road ahead will be challenging, they're moving forward together.